Our next speaker is a Machon Shilo associate, a very frequent contributor to the Machon Shilo YouTube channel, member of Rabbi Bar-Hayim's Beit Hawad, and a rabbi serving the Anglo community in Kochav Yaakov. This is a good opportunity to thank Rabbi Grossman for his tremendous devotion to the Machon Shilo community, both to the many students who follow him on the Machon Shilo YouTube channel, and to the many who are hosted by he and Rabbi Avi Grossman all the time. I must also mention that Rabbi Avi Grossman runs a marriage counseling organization, which I hope none of you need, which can be found at connectedforreal.com. I hope you will not need her, but if you do, she's available. Rabbi Grossman.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Binyamin, for the kind introduction. I'd like to say first that the sages told us that we are supposed to remember the Exodus from Egypt every single day. But there are some days of the year, and also some days of the week, in which we are supposed to be more mindful of the Exodus. Of course, we're talking about every single Shabbos, every holiday is Zecher L'Yetziat Mitzrayim. So too, there's Passover. That's the day when we go all out, remembering that which happened. On the same line of reasoning, the sages said we are supposed to thank God every day just for being alive. However, there are also some days where we get together and say, this is a special day where we note, we mark, we're thanking God just for being alive. We thank God for that gift. We thank God for keeping people alive. We thank God for saving us from our enemies, and we should never lose sight of that. That it is always in God's hands and not ours. I'd also like to thank all the organizers. Okay. There's some words. Birshus, the Rav, Mr. Pollard, Dave, Binyamin, Rabbi Siskin, even though he's not here, Kvodo here. I'll start with this. I'm honored to be addressing you this evening. Right in the middle of the book of Samuel, we read of some of King David's exploits when he decided that in the waning months of Saul's reign, it would be best for him and his followers to take refuge in Philistia as a client of King Achish of Gath, who provided David with his own personal town in reward for David's exceptional loyalty, at least as he perceived it. This translation is my own. David and his men went up and raided the Geshurites, the Gizrites, and the Amalekites, for they were the inhabitants of the land since the olden days, as you approach Shur, until the land of Egypt. David would smite the land, and he would leave neither man nor woman alive. He would take sheep, cattle, donkeys, and camels and clothing, and then return and go to Achish. Achish would say, "Where have you raided today?" And David would say, "The Negev area of Judah, the Negev of the Rachmielites, and the Negev of the Canaanites." These are all Jewish areas David was claiming to have raided, but of course he did not. David left no survivors who might come to God to relate what David had really done. This was David's modus operandi the entire time he lived in Philistia. So I'll ask a question. What moral justification could David have had for these brutal acts of aggression? Today, I know of many rabbis who are ashamed to teach of such episodes, or claim that we cannot even consider that perhaps David's deeds can serve as a model for our own, even though the prophets seem to extol David for this behavior. The answer in context is that for many centuries, these and other pagan neighbors had constantly attacked the Israelites, raping and pillaging, plundering and murdering, and such was our ancestors' lot in many periods since they first settled Canaan. And such is described both implicitly and explicitly many times in the books of Judges, Samuel, and the Psalms. For the specifics, if you want to talk about that after I'm done talking. David, as the ideal Jewish leader and tzaddik that he was, the model for the Messiah we anticipate even today, stood up for his people and visited upon their enemies that which they had brought upon Israel all along. We should be alarmed by our generation's mass media culture. Yes, freedom of expression has done much for the advancement of mankind and also has benefited the Jewish people. But now, around the world, the phenomenon of widespread mass media consumption has been used as a tool of universal indoctrination and control. And not surprisingly, indoctrination in ideologies not in consonance with the Torah. The best of many examples. The second narrative of the entire Torah, the story of the Garden of Eden, is a critically timeless metaphor for how man has to constantly confront, contend with, and conquer the evil inclination, and foreshadows how God ultimately gave his chosen people the key, the code, to beating that evil inclination so that they, and the rest of mankind as an extension, could return to a pristine state of existence in which all men could be free to spend their days contemplating his divine majesty and continuously drawing closer to his presence. Yet today, one who lives in the world outside of the 4 cubits of the law, by exposing himself to the mass media, finds his very being saturated with the gospel not of a false Messiah, like we used to have, who at least preached some form of reigning in the Yetzer Hara, but instead with the message that surrendering to the evil inclination, man's most base desires, is the highest ideal, a mitzvah if you will. The claim that the Jews who stand up against their enemies, thereby desecrate the name of heaven, can only be made after reading and hearing what the official media want you to digest. Both recent history in the Western world and the rest of history in the totalitarian world should by now have taught us not to trust them. The hapless consumers hear tales of lawless Jewish vigilantes attacking innocent civilians, thus violating the laws of a state that maintains the rule of law, while I see my besieged brothers abandoned by their state security apparatus to the cruelties of their savage Ishmaelite neighbors, who, when left with no choice but to engage in war with said neighbors, are then punished and besmirched by the usurpers of the state, and criticized, denounced, and then disavowed by their more comfortable brothers. Many are imprisoned without trial, while others who at least had the chance to stand trial are imprisoned in the harshest conditions for terms unfairly long. I have confidence in my perception of the reality because I have seen some of it with my own eyes, or I have heard it firsthand from reliable friends and neighbors. Whatever you hear today from most outfits should be summarily dismissed as the most vile and baseless propaganda designed with obvious effectiveness to make you ashamed of your own, to declare that somehow standing up for Jews is a desecration of the divine name. I can only imagine well-to-do and well-meaning comfortable Jews in America in 1943 reading reports of ethno-nationalist Jewish extremists terrorizing the poor German security forces stationed around the Warsaw Ghetto, and responding with alarm and disdain. After all, they say, violence against innocence is not our way. Why is it that those prosecuted for these alleged crimes are denied basic aspects of due process, the right to legal representation, public trials, and not being convicted on the basis of confessions obtained through torture? Why are they held in solitary confinement and treated worse than wanton murderers of our people? Why do these facts not bother so many of us? If Jacob was attacked by Esau, but managed to wrestle the sword from his hands, would he not be justified in wielding it against him? That's what David did to Goliath. I have not obtained a PhD in philosophy, nor do I associate enough with the West's political left, so I cannot come to such sophisticated conclusions as our brothers south of Jerusalem have. But instead, I can only rely on the precedent described in the books of our prophets and codified by our sages. When a Jewish town in the land of Israel is under attack, we are obligated to come to its defense and to violate the Sabbath in order to do so. We are certainly not to doubt their motivations, let alone denounce them. So, I'll conclude with a prayer. May God place many more Davids among us. Amen. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Pollard for his Mesirut Nefesh for the sake of Klal Yisrael. Thank you.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.